Captain William Kidd was hanged for piracy in 1701, and legends of his buried treasure have been sparking imaginations since. One concerns the riches he may have left on Bedloe's Land, now known as Liberty Island. Back in the 19th century, the tale proved so enticing that two soldiers stationed at Fort Wood, the island's tenant prior to Lady Liberty, decided to hunt for the treasure. A psychic sent them looking for the largest flat rock at midnight on a full moon, armed with a witch hazel divining rod. According to legend, they found the treasure and a cutlass-waving ghost. The soldiers fled, and when they returned, both ghost and treasure chest were gone. The New York Times published a story about the events in the August 14, 1892 edition. The tale was later recounted with dramatic flair in a 2005 book titled Spooky New York by S. E. Schlosser. Says Libby Tucker, folklorist and English professor at Binghamton University, people have gone and dug, but there's no consensus on the largest flat rock. That said, the city is definitely in consensus when it comes to digging up Liberty Island. As ghost ships go, this one is fairly friendly. A tall-masted vessel, supposedly visible during foggy days at dusk, is the apparition of a ship that was wrecked on the rocks because her crew was careless. It's a warning, says Binghamton University professor Libby Tucker. If you see it, you'd better not go out on the water. The earliest printed version of the tale is from a book titled The Hudson by Wallace Bruce, published in 1894. Bruce writes that when New York City was little more than a village, the whole of the population grew excited one night as an unfamiliar ship approached. But she turned aside, continued up the Hudson, and never returned. Whenever a storm came down on Haverstraw Bay or Tappan Zee, it is said that she could be seen careening over the waist, and you could hear the captain giving orders in good Low Dutch. Many claim she was the spirit of Henry Hudson's Half Moon, which has once run aground upriver. Years after John Lennon was shot dead in front of his Central Park West apartment building, the Dakota, his widow Yoko Ono saw his ghost sitting at his white piano. She claims he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid. I am still with you." When he was alive, Lennon himself claimed to have spotted a figure wandering the halls of the Dakota, whom he referred to as Crying Lady Ghost. Other residents are said to have encountered the specter of a little girl, about 7 years of age, smiling and laughing and greeting people in the hallways. The Dakota's original owner, Edward Clark, had an interest in the paranormal, and would often host seances to communicate with the dead. The more you play with the paranormal, the more likely you are to experience paranormal activity in the future, says paranormal researcher Jessica Jewett. She believes that when people are murdered suddenly and violently, their spirits linger. In John Lennon's case, his life was cut short in his prime. He was only 40 years old. Someone like him was happy to be alive. He was working. He had a small child. He had unfinished business. It's a prime recipe for a classic haunting. Nearly 50 blocks south, at the Chelsea Hotel, some residents believe tragic Sex Pistols rocker Sid Vicious is still kicking around the place, though he died in 1979. And not at the Chelsea. Diners at West Village hotspot Da Silvano were startled when a subway grate on the side of 6th Avenue lifted and a shadowy figure tossed a smoking road flare into the restaurant. Was the vandal a sign that the mole people, those who shun life above ground in favor of the city's deepest subway passages, were back and seeking revenge on surface dwellers? Jennifer Toff, author of the 1993 book The Mole People, Life in the Tunnels Beneath New York City, says rumors of people living underground started as early as the 1800 seconds, when the city first started building the subway. Funding has increased to close of abandoned tunnels to keep people from making them their homes. But with more than 700 miles of subway tracks, she says there are plenty of people still down there. Today, there's a thriving community of homeless people living underneath the city, Toff says. Though they're not mole people, they're just people. But it gets weirder. A common reason for delays during subway construction is when workers come across a colony of people living underground and refuse to move forward, Toff claims. Another legend and curiosity of New York itself is the subway system. Over 100 years old, the subway has had its fair share of renovations and station changes, leading to old stations to be retired, inaccessible, or hidden. One such station is located near City Hall of the 6 train. The official last stop is Brooklyn Bridge when headed downtown, and conductors advise passengers to leave the train. But if you stay on the 6, the train loops around to head back uptown. You can see the abandoned City Hall station that closed in 1945. Another secret train station that could be considered a legend and curiosity of New York City is the secret train station Track 61. Underneath the old Waldorf Astoria, Track 61 is a train station that was built for President Franklin Roosevelt as a means to hide his polio condition from the public eye, and which allowed him direct access into the hotel via a lift. It's believed that evidence of Track 61's entry can be found in the hotel's 49th Street location. Everyone knows about the treasure supposedly buried on Liberty Island. But did you know that there's also treasure to be found in the East River, specifically at the spot in the river called Hellgate? The aptly named Hellgate is tidal strait where currents from the East River, the Harlem River, Long Island Sound, and New York Harbor all meet, creating treacherous, hellish conditions for boats passing through. Historically, the water was so rough that by the 1850s, 1 in 50 boats that went through Hellgate were either damaged or sunk, and an average of 1,000 boats ran aground here each year. One of the ships that met his demise at Hellgate was the HMS Hussar, a British Royal Navy ship that was purportedly carrying 960,000 pounds of gold when it crashed into one of the boulders in the water in 1780 and sank to the bottom of the river. The British did a search mission to recover any items from the shipwreck, but they denied that any gold was on board the ship at the time of the crash. Still, the rumor of riches at the bottom of the river lived on, with multiple attempts being made to find the legendary gold even as recent as 1985. Even if there was ever gold, it seems futile to search for it now, as in the late 1800s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers used 25 tons of explosives to blow Hellgate's rocks, reefs, and treasure to smithereens. Of all New York legends, the alligators in the sewer legend sound the most made up. But what if I told you that there is a bona fide report of an alligator being found in the city's sewers? Back in February 1935, the New York Times reported that a few boys were shoveling snow into a manhole in East Harlem when they realized that an honest-to-God alligator was in the sewer beneath them. So logically, they got some rope, pulled the alligator out of the sewer, and beat it to death. There are photos of this sewer alligator, and New York Times report noted that there were neighborhood witnesses, leading us to believe that this scaly tale is true. There have even been more alligator sightings in the city since then, with most of the most recent alligator sighting being in Manhattan in 2015. But do individual alligators sightings mean that there's a whole colony of alligators waiting in the toxic waters of the sewers? Probably not. The viability of such colony thriving under those conditions is low. So what explains these reptilian run-ins? According to the New York Times, it was common to find ads in the paper advertising alligators for sale in the 1900s, and several people would sneak baby alligators back to their homes in New York after vacationing in Florida. But when the reptiles inevitably got too big and unruly, people would release them into the sewers or into a public park. Lake Champlain is the 6th largest freshwater lake in North America, straddling the borders of New York, Vermont, and Quebec, Canada. Its shores are home to numerous quaint New England towns and tourist hotspots, and the region brims with a rich history stretching back to pre-European settlement. The waters of Lake Champlain are hundreds of feet deep in some places, and connected to the Atlantic Ocean through a network of rivers and smaller lakes, providing plenty of opportunities for mysterious swimming beasts to make their way into the area. And this seems to have been going on for a very long time, as there is at least one monster known to be living in Lake Champlain. Local Native American cultures, including both the Abenaki and the Iroquois, shared legends of a lake monster with European explorers very early on, a creature that the Abenaki called Tataskak. The earliest recorded sighting of the beast is ascribed to none other than Samuel de Champlain himself, the man after whom the lake is named. In 1609, he reportedly witnessed a 20-foot serpent thick as a barrel and head like a horse. Encounters with Champ, or Champy as the monster is now called, continue to the present day. But perhaps the most famous sighting occurred in 1977 when Sandra Mancy photographed the monster while having a picnic with friends and family. In the photo, Champ looks an awful lot like his more famous colleague Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. However, it's more important to note that he's been around a lot longer. Nessie was first spotted in 1933, more than 300 years after Samuel de Champlain's encounter with Champ. Most people associate Bigfoot with the Pacific Northwest, but in fact, there's evidence that the creatures are common in many stretches of pristine wilderness across North America, including the old forests of upstate New York that cluster around Lake Champlain in Essex and Warren counties. Many people have reported hairy wild men in the area over the decades, but one unlucky fellow encountered Bigfoot close up twice in the span of just a few years, and both run-ins with the creature were terrifying. The first happened on June 25, 1989, when Scott David Harris and two friends were looking for one of their brothers, who was lost in the woods late at night. Walking along a railroad track that followed Lake Champlain's shoreline, they heard awful thrashing, growling, and metal-ripping noises coming from the south bank of the trail. Whatever it was seemed to hear them, too, because the noises it was making stopped, and it came over to check them out. Harris couldn't get a good look at the creature in the dark, but his friends ran off. He stuck around long enough to feel its breath and realize it was a huge and smelly beast. When he ran, it chased him and only stopped its pursuit when Harris and his friends broke out of the woods and onto the nearby road. But Bigfoot wasn't done with Harris yet. A few years later, in 1993, Harris was parked on a trail near West Point with another friend, waiting for a party to start, when he saw a huge, black, hairy creature coming out of the woods and reaching out for the car's rear door. Harris alerted his friend, who immediately drove away, and Harris saw the creature rear up in the car's lights with glowing red eyes. Another legend of the 21st century. Hurricane Sandy caused billions of dollars in damage to New York. Its consequences are still felt by the residents. One of them told how he heard sounds coming from behind a wall. It was scratching and running around. Mark, as he called himself, reported that one day, entering the kitchen, he saw a rat the size of a small cat crawling along the grocery shelves. He set up traps that proved ineffective. The guy could not understand how the rats got to the 5th floor of the building in which he lived. There was also a theory that weaker rats were exterminated, and the surviving rodents raised a new generation of stronger and more tenacious super rats. However, Robert Sullivan, author of Rats, Observations on the History and Habitat of the City's Most Unwanted Inhabitants, argues that the likelihood of super rats is the same as the realism of Bigfoot.